we have hundreds of people, thousands of people trying to come into our country because they feel they're going to be killed and their land is going to be confiscated. And you do have laws that were passed that gives you the right to confiscate land for no payment. You can take away land for no payment.
I want to clarify that because we have a constitution. Our constitution guarantees and protects the sanctity of tenure of land ownership. And that constitution protects all South Africans with regard to land ownership. However, we do say, because we've got to deal with the past, the government, and as your government also has the right to expropriate land for public use.
And you're doing that.
And we've never really gotten underway with that. And we are going to be doing so.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
from them.
We have.
And those people, in many cases, are being executed.
Yeah.
They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that. How do you explain that? They're taking people's land away, and in many cases, those people are being executed. And in many cases, it's not the government that's doing it. It's people that kill them and then take their land, and nothing happens to them.
These land activists do not seem to be able to differentiate or distinguish between the idea of restitution and the idea of redistribution, which is fundamentally different. It could be the same thing, but the definition is very different. So restitution says you need to correct an injustice. There was something that happened that was wrong. There was a wrongdoing and we need to fix that. And I think any reasonable person should support that. If there was a wrongdoing, if there was a community that was chased off their land, then they should get their land back. I think that as a matter of principle. Redistribution is something else. And the way at least what redistribution means today is it just means look at whoever is the owner of a piece of land. Mm-hmm. If the person who owns the land is white, that is a problem. If the person who owns the land is black, that's a good thing. But that doesn't recognize that you can be the owner of a piece of land and be a white person and have acquired that piece of land through legitimate means. So what makes it complicated today is there were land injustices. There were injustices in terms of how patterns of land ownership developed. And there were certainly black communities that were dispossessed of their land. That's undoubtedly the case. That then is interpreted today as every black person that lives in South Africa was dispossessed, and every white person that lives in South Africa was involved with these dispossessions. And so every white person that owns land, there should be a question mark upon that person, or that ownership is illegitimate. And every black person that doesn't own land, that's because some white person took your land. And it's more complicated than that. But the problem is, dealing with history through political solutions is very difficult because you lose nuance, and the problem or the issue becomes narrowed down to a question of populism, and whichever politician is able to be the most populist, to scream the loudest, to be the most controversial in presenting the argument, eventually wins the argument. Not necessarily because they win on the facts, but because they win on the politics of the argument. And that's because, and I think this has led to a place where the whole debate about land ownership has become so warped in South Africa that it's very difficult to sort of find your way through and sort of come out on the other side and still be sane.
Local, provincial and national authorities will use this legislation to expropriate land in the public interest for varied reasons that seek to, amongst others, promote inclusivity and access to natural resources. That's from the South African Parliament website.
Yes.
Where is the line? When is it too much? You're trying too hard to fix things that happened 200 years ago. And when is it just? You said that any reasonable person would actually agree with these measures, but it's just harder in reality to actually practically implement these things. Yeah. How do we navigate this? And is it always wrong to expropriate land without compensation?
Well, firstly, I think any reasonable person should agree that there were injustices in South Africa as far as land is concerned. There were also white people who were dispossessed, but if the issue is ownership of land by black people, it certainly did happen, that communities were dispossessed. And any reasonable person should then agree that where that happened, it has to be corrected. There has to be either compensation in the form of money, because a lot of these people have said actually that they would rather want money as compensation than actually getting the land. Or they should get the land, or there should be some form of a correction. But again, it's difficult to correct things that happened in the past by implementing policies today. I think reasonable people should agree with that. It becomes, but I also think reasonable people should be willing to take a stance against the idea that the race of the owner of the land, by definition, declares whether that ownership is legitimate or not. And that is really literally what politicians in South Africa, in the ruling party and other radical or leftist parties, want to do. They would explicitly argue this, that your race determines whether your ownership is legitimate. And so the question then is, how do we deal with things like these? How do we deal with this in correcting historic injustices in a way that moves us forward? I'm not sure if there's a very clear answer. And I am very much guided or influenced by Thomas Sowell's thinking on this, who has said, in a certain sense, it's not good news, because his conclusion is that he hasn't been able to find a single example anywhere in the world of a community that moved from poverty to affluence as a result of political interventions, so policy interventions. And his conclusion is the only way to move from poverty to affluence is, he calls it a combination of three things. It's training or skills development, combined with savings, combined with hard work or work ethic. You cannot move from poverty to affluence if you don't have training and skills development, if you don't have a culture of savings, and if you don't have proper work ethic. Now, a lot of people in South Africa work really hard. So I'm not saying that, people are lazy. Some people are, but a lot of people work really hard, but they are still very poor. And I think that's why part of the working hard alone is not the solution. Part of the solution is having a proper, well-functioning education system, where you can work hard, and as a result of your hard work, you actually become better at what you do, and your skills become improved. And then the third part, according to Thomas Sowell, is then a culture of saving, not just when you get money, spend it on an expensive car or expensive handbag or purse or something. And it makes sense to say you need the combination of these three things. But the problem is, none of these three things are a priority for those in power. What's a priority for them is political scapegoating, using minorities as a punching bag, trying to implement socialist policies that not only doesn't it focus on any of these three things, it actively disadvantages these three things. It's bad for the education system. It disincentivizes hard work because you get social grants from the government. And when you actually go out and get a job, you lose your social grants. So why would you want to start working? So the policies that they are implementing actively undermines the solution.